My name is Catherine Mitchell, and I'm 34 years old. 3 months ago, I stood in the funeral home chapel watching my father make the biggest mistake of his life. As mourners filed past my mother's casket, he couldn't contain his excitement about inheriting her $3.2 million estate. "Everything she owned belongs to me now," he announced to the room full of shocked relatives, his voice carrying that familiar tone of smug satisfaction I had heard my entire life. That's when I quietly smiled and said the words that would change everything. "Actually, Dad, she put it all in a secret account under my name 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that chapel as 43 people turned to stare at me, their faces ranging from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror, especially my father's face, which went from triumphant to pale in about 3 seconds. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because what happened next exposed decades of family secrets and showed everyone exactly what happens when a man who spent 30 years emotionally tormenting his wife and daughter finally faces the consequences of his actions. But to understand how we got to that moment, me standing in a funeral home delivering the most satisfying line of my life, I need to take you back to the beginning and show you the pattern of manipulation and control that had defined our family for as long as I could remember. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding one fundamental rule: Dad was always right, and everyone else existed to serve his needs and stroke his ego. My father, Richard Mitchell, was a successful corporate attorney who had built his identity around being the smartest person in every room. He didn't just want to win arguments, he needed to dominate them, to make sure everyone knew he was superior. My mother, Helen, had been a brilliant woman in her own right. She had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in economics and had been working as a financial analyst when she met my father. But Richard couldn't tolerate having a wife who might outshine him professionally, so he convinced her to give up her career when they married. "A man needs to know his wife supports his ambitions," he would say whenever the topic came up. "Helen understands that my career has to come first if we want to build the life we deserve." What he really meant was that he couldn't handle the possibility of his wife being more successful than him, so he systematically dismantled her professional confidence until she believed she was lucky to have him. By the time I was born, Mom had been transformed from a confident, ambitious woman into someone who second-guessed every decision and constantly sought Dad's approval. She had internalized his message that she wasn't smart enough to handle important matters, that she needed his guidance for everything from managing money to choosing what to wear to social events. "Your mother is wonderful," Dad would tell people at parties, his arm around her waist in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive. "But she's not really a business person. She's much better at the domestic side of things, taking care of the home, raising Catherine. That's where her talents really shine." The condescension was so subtle that most people didn't recognize it as emotional manipulation. They saw a successful lawyer praising his wife's homemaking skills, not a controlling man systematically undermining her self-worth. I grew up watching this dynamic play out daily. Dad would make decisions about everything: where we lived, how we spent money, what schools I attended, even what Mom wore to important events. If she ever expressed a different opinion, he would dismiss it with a patronizing smile. "Sweetheart, you don't understand how these things work," he would say, his tone gentle but his words cutting. "Let me handle the complicated stuff. You focus on what you're good at." Mom learned to stop offering opinions. She learned to defer to Dad's judgment on everything, to present herself as grateful for his wisdom and guidance. But I could see the spark of intelligence in her eyes dimming year by year as she convinced herself that she really wasn't capable of making important decisions. The financial control was particularly insidious. Dad managed all the money, giving Mom a household allowance like she was a child, receiving an allowance for chores. She had to ask permission for any purchase over $100, and he would quiz her about every expense. "Helen, why did you spend $47 at the grocery store yesterday?" he would ask, reviewing the bank statements at the kitchen table. "That seems excessive for a family of 3. "I bought those steaks you like," she would explain nervously. And the good olive oil you said we should use for entertaining. Next time, check with me before buying premium items, he would reply. We need to be more careful about unnecessary expenses. The irony was that we were wealthy. Dad's law practice was extremely successful, and we lived in a beautiful house in an exclusive neighborhood. But he used money as a tool of control, making Mom feel like every dollar she spent was a burden on the family finances. As I got older, I began to see through Dad's manipulation tactics, but Mom was so deeply conditioned that she couldn't recognize them anymore. She genuinely believed she was fortunate to have a husband who was willing to handle all the complicated aspects of their life together. Your father is so smart, she would tell me as I helped her with dinner preparations. I don't know what I would do without him to guide me through all these financial decisions. Mom, you have a degree in economics, I would remind her. You used to analyze corporate investments for a living. That was different, she would say, dismissing her own expertise. That was just numbers on paper. Real life is much more complicated. Dad had convinced her that her professional experience was irrelevant to managing personal finances, that academic knowledge couldn't compare to his practical wisdom. It was a masterful piece of psychological manipulation that kept her dependent on him for everything. The pattern extended to how he treated me as well. As his daughter, I was expected to be grateful for his guidance and to defer to his superior judgment on all important matters. When I expressed interest in studying law like him, he discouraged me. Law is a very demanding field, Catherine, he would say. It requires a certain type of analytical mind. You might be happier in something more suited to your personality, maybe teaching or social work. The message was clear. I wasn't smart enough to succeed in his profession. Like Mom, I was better suited to helping roles that wouldn't threaten his position as the family's intellectual authority. But unlike Mom, I refused to accept his limitations. I studied hard, got excellent grades, and eventually earned a scholarship to law school despite his lack of support. When I graduated and was hired by a prestigious firm in Chicago, Dad's reaction was telling. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, he said at my graduation party. But don't let success go to your head. Remember, you still have a lot to learn about how the real world works. Even my achievements had to be diminished to maintain his sense of superiority. Mom, meanwhile, had found her own quiet form of rebellion. While Dad controlled the household finances, she had inherited a small amount of money from her parents over the years, amounts that seemed insignificant to Dad, but that she had been secretly saving and investing. I have a little nest egg, she confided to me one day when I was visiting. Nothing major, just some money I've put aside over the years. Your father doesn't need to worry about such small amounts. I didn't think much of it at the time. Mom had always been secretive about the few things Dad didn't directly control, and I assumed she was talking about a few $1,000s she had managed to save from her household allowance. I had no idea that her little nest egg would eventually become the key to exposing 30 years of financial and emotional manipulation. The real revelation would come during Mom's final illness, when I discovered that the woman Dad had convinced everyone was not a business person had actually been making brilliant financial decisions for decades, decisions that would ultimately give her the power to ensure he faced consequences for a lifetime of controlling behavior. The illness that revealed everything. 2 years ago, Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, 12 to 18 months with treatment, possibly less without it. Dad's reaction to the diagnosis was typically self-centered. This is going to be very difficult for me, he told the oncologist during our first meeting. I have a demanding practice, and Helen has always handled the domestic responsibilities. I'm not sure how I'm going to manage everything. Not once did he ask how Mom was feeling or what she needed. His primary concern was how her illness would inconvenience him. I immediately took a leave of absence from my job to help coordinate Mom's care and support her through treatment. Dad, meanwhile, continued his normal routine with minimal adjustments, treating Mom's cancer like a temporary disruption to his comfortable lifestyle. Catherine can handle the medical appointments, he would tell people. She's much better at that nurturing stuff than I am. I need to focus on keeping the practice running so we can afford all these treatments. The treatments were expensive, but we could easily afford them. Dad's practice generated over $800,000 annually, and they had substantial savings and investments. But he used the medical expenses as another tool of control, making Mom feel guilty about the cost of her care. "These treatments are costing us a fortune," he would complain while reviewing insurance statements. "I hope they're worth it." The cruelty of making a woman feel guilty for trying to survive cancer was breathtaking, but it was consistent with Dad's lifelong pattern of making Mom feel like a burden. During one of Mom's chemotherapy sessions, she asked me to drive her to a meeting with someone she called her financial advisor. I was surprised. I didn't know Mom had a financial advisor separate from Dad's wealth management team. "I've been working with Patricia Chen for about 15 years, Mom explained as we drove to the appointment. "She helps me manage my inheritance money and some investments I've made over the years." Patricia Chen's office was in a modest building downtown, far from the prestigious financial district where Dad's advisors worked. Patricia herself was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who greeted Mom with genuine warmth and concern. "How are you feeling, Helen?" she asked, helping Mom into a comfortable chair. "I've been so worried since you told me about the diagnosis." What followed was the most shocking conversation of my life. As Patricia pulled out files and statements, I learned that Mom's little nest egg was actually a carefully managed portfolio worth over $3.2 million. "Your mother has been an excellent investor," Patricia explained to me. "She started with a small inheritance from her parents 25 years ago and has been making regular contributions and smart investment choices ever since." I stared at the statements showing accounts I had never heard of, investments in companies I recognized, and a diversified portfolio that would have impressed any financial professional. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "how did you accumulate this much money?" She smiled sadly. "Your father gives me a household allowance of $800 a month, but over the years I've been very careful with expenses. I clip coupons, shop sales, buy generic brands. I usually only spend about $500 of the allowance, and I've been investing the difference." "For 25 years? I calculated quickly. "That's only about $75,000 in savings." "The savings were just the beginning," Patricia interjected. "Helen has a natural talent for identifying undervalued stocks. She's been researching companies, reading financial reports, and making investment decisions that have consistently outperformed the market." Mom had been hiding her financial genius for decades, pretending to be the helpless woman Dad needed her to be, while secretly building a fortune through her own intelligence and discipline. "Why didn't you ever tell Dad about this?" I asked. Mom's expression grew sad. "Because he would have taken control of it. He would have told me I was making mistakes, that I didn't understand what I was doing. He would have moved everything to his advisors and made all the decisions himself." She was right, of course. Dad's need to control every aspect of their financial life would never have allowed Mom to maintain her own investment portfolio. "But more than that," Mom continued, "I wanted to have something that was mine, something I had built through my own knowledge and decisions. Your father has spent 30 years telling me I'm not smart enough to handle money. This portfolio is proof that he's wrong." The meeting with Patricia revealed another shocking detail. Mom had been gradually moving money from their joint accounts into her private portfolio for years, small amounts that Dad never noticed because he was so focused on the larger investment accounts managed by his team. "I've been very careful," Mom explained. "Never more than a few $100s at a time, always from accounts with regular activity so the transfers wouldn't stand out. Your father reviews the statements, but he's looking for major changes, not small adjustments." She had been conducting a decades-long financial rebellion right under Dad's nose, using his own arrogance and inattention to detail against him. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "Helen has asked me to help her with some estate planning," Patricia said, pulling out another set of documents. "Given her diagnosis, she wants to make sure her assets are distributed according to her wishes." "What kind of estate planning?" I asked. Mom took my hand. "Catherine, I want you to inherit my portfolio. All of it. Your father has his own substantial assets from his practice and our joint investments. This money represents my independence, my intelligence, my ability to make good decisions despite what he's always told me. I want it to go to someone who will value what it represents. I was stunned. Mom, that's over $3 million. It's also 30 years of proof that I'm not the helpless woman your father thinks I am, she replied. I want you to have it, but more than that, I want him to know that I was capable of building something significant without his help or guidance. Patricia explained the legal process. Mom would transfer all her assets to a trust with me as the beneficiary. The trust would be funded gradually over the next several months to avoid triggering any reporting requirements that might alert Dad to the transfers. The beauty of this approach, Patricia said, is that these assets were never part of your parents' joint estate. Your mother built this portfolio using her own inheritance and savings, so your father has no legal claim to it. Over the following months, as Mom's health declined, she systematically transferred her entire secret portfolio to the trust. Dad, focused on his work and increasingly frustrated by the demands of caring for a sick wife, never noticed the financial maneuvering happening right under his nose. He's going to be so angry, Mom said during one of our last conversations about the trust. He's been counting on inheriting everything when I pass away. He's already talking about how he'll manage our assets more efficiently. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked. It's going to create a lot of family drama. Mom's eyes, though weakened by illness, showed a spark of the intelligence Dad had spent decades trying to suppress. Catherine, your father has controlled every aspect of my life for 30 years. He's made me feel small, dependent, and incapable. This is my chance to show him, and everyone else, that he was wrong about me. She paused, gathering strength for what she wanted to say next. But more than that, I want him to face consequences for how he's treated us. He's been emotionally manipulative and financially controlling our entire marriage. He's dismissed your achievements and undermined your confidence just like he did mine. It's time someone stood up to him. 3 weeks later, Mom passed away peacefully in her sleep. Dad's first concern wasn't grief or loss. It was securing access to what he assumed would be a substantial inheritance. He had no idea that the woman he had spent decades underestimating had just delivered the most devastating blow of his life. The funeral was held at Riverside Memorial Chapel, the same venue where Dad's parents had been memorialized years earlier. It was a beautiful service with over 100 attendees, colleagues from Dad's firm, neighbors, family friends, and relatives who had traveled from across the country to pay their respects. Dad played the role of grieving widower perfectly. He wore his most expensive black suit, spoke eloquently about Mom's devotion to family, and accepted condolences with the dignified composure of a man who had lost his beloved partner. Helen was the foundation of our family, he told the gathered mourners during his eulogy. She dedicated her life to creating a loving home and supporting my career. Her greatest joy was taking care of the people she loved. The speech was a masterpiece of revisionist history. He painted Mom as a woman who had chosen domesticity over career ambition, who had found fulfillment in supporting his success rather than pursuing her own. There was no mention of the brilliant economist who had given up her career at his insistence, no acknowledgement of the financial genius who had been building a secret portfolio for decades. As people filed past the casket to pay their final respects, I watched Dad work the room like he was at a networking event. He shook hands, accepted business cards, and made small talk about returning to normal routines. His grief seemed performative, designed to elicit sympathy and admiration for how well he was handling his loss. But the performance reached its peak during the reception at our family home. Dad had hired caterers and transformed our living room into an elegant gathering space where mourners could share memories and offer support. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting condolences while subtly steering conversations toward his future plans. Of course, I'll miss Helen terribly, he told his law partner, James Morrison, as they stood near the fireplace. But I'm fortunate that she was so well organized. She always said she wanted me to be comfortable if anything happened to her. That's when he made his first major mistake. Emboldened by the sympathetic audience and his assumption that he was about to inherit Mom's assets, Dad began talking openly about his financial situation. Helen was very conservative with money, he told a group of relatives, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending affection. She never really understood investments or financial planning, but she was excellent at saving. I'll be able to manage her assets much more efficiently now. My Aunt Margaret, Mom's younger sister, looked uncomfortable. Richard, don't you think it's a bit early to be discussing financial matters? Oh, I'm not being mercenary, Dad replied with a dismissive wave. I'm just being practical. Helen would want me to make smart decisions about the money she left behind. She always deferred to my judgment on these matters. The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, with Dad painting himself as the wise financial steward who would honor Mom's memory by managing her legacy responsibly. Several people in the room exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with his focus on money at his wife's funeral. But Dad was just getting started. As the afternoon wore on and the alcohol flowed, his comments became increasingly inappropriate. He began talking about investment opportunities he was considering, trips he might take now that he had more freedom, and even hints about eventually finding companionship again. Helen wouldn't want me to be alone forever, he told Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor. She was always concerned about my happiness. I'm sure she'd want me to find someone to share my life with when I'm ready. Mrs. Patterson looked scandalized. Richard, Helen passed away this morning. Don't you think it's rather soon to be thinking about such things? I'm not thinking about it now, he backpedaled quickly. I'm just saying that Helen was a practical woman. She would want me to be happy and financially secure. That's when he made his second major mistake. Standing in the center of our living room, surrounded by 43 mourners, Dad decided to make an announcement that he clearly thought would impress everyone with his newfound wealth and independence. I want everyone to know how grateful I am for your support during this difficult time, he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in courtrooms. Helen's passing is a tremendous loss, but I take comfort in knowing that she's left me well provided for. The room grew quiet as people realized he was about to discuss financial matters at his wife's funeral. Everything she owned belongs to me now, he continued, his voice gaining confidence. Her savings, her investments, all of it. Helen always said she wanted me to be comfortable, and thanks to her careful saving over the years, I'll be able to maintain our lifestyle, and maybe even improve it. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock and disgust on people's faces as they processed what they had just heard. Dad had just announced his inheritance at his wife's funeral, treating her passing like a business transaction that had worked out in his favor. That's when I knew it was time. I had been standing near the kitchen doorway, watching Dad's performance with a mixture of disgust and anticipation. I had the trust documents in my purse, along with Patricia Chen's business card and a summary of Mom's actual financial situation. I had been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth, and Dad had just given it to me. I stepped forward into the center of the room, my voice calm and clear. Actually, Dad, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, she put it all in a secret account under my name 6 months ago. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that room as 43 people turned to stare at me, their faces showing various stages of confusion, disbelief, and dawning understanding. Dad's face went through a remarkable transformation. The confident smile faded first, replaced by confusion. Then came disbelief as he processed what I had said. Finally, his face went pale as the implications began to sink in. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled the trust documents from my purse and held them up for everyone to see. Mom had been secretly building an investment portfolio for 25 years, I announced to the room. She accumulated over $3.2 million through her own intelligence and financial decisions. 6 months ago, she transferred all of it to a trust with me as the beneficiary. The gasps from the crowd were audible. Several people began whispering to each other, trying to process this shocking revelation. Dad's face had gone from pale to red. "That's impossible, he sputtered. "Helen didn't have any money of her own. I managed all our finances." "No, Dad," I replied calmly. You managed the finances you knew about. Mom had her own portfolio, her own advisor, and her own investment strategy, and she was brilliant at it. I began reading from the trust documents, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The Helen Mitchell Trust, established March 15th, contains assets valued at $3,247,000 as of the date of transfer. These assets consist of individual stocks, mutual funds, and bonds accumulated by Helen Mitchell through her personal savings and investment activities over a period of 25 years. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. People were staring at Dad, then at me, then back at Dad, trying to understand how this situation had developed. Dad looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "Helen couldn't have hidden that much money from me. I review all our statements. I know every account we have." "You knew every account you had together," I corrected. "You didn't know about Mom's private portfolio because she deliberately kept it separate from your joint finances." I pulled out Patricia Chen's business card and held it up. Mom worked with Patricia Chen at Chen Financial Services for 15 years. Patricia helped her build a diversified portfolio that consistently outperformed the market. Mom was making investment decisions that your high-priced advisors never thought of. The implications were sinking in for everyone in the room. The woman Dad had spent 30 years dismissing as financially incompetent had secretly accumulated more wealth than most people see in a lifetime. But I wasn't finished. I had one more revelation that would complete Mom's revenge. "There's something else everyone should know," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Mom didn't just build this portfolio through lucky investments. She funded it by carefully managing the household allowance Dad gave her and by gradually transferring small amounts from their joint accounts over the years." I looked directly at Dad, whose face was now a mixture of rage and humiliation. "She took the $800 monthly allowance you gave her, like she was a child receiving spending money, and she turned it into over $3 million through her own financial genius. The woman you always said wasn't a business person, outperformed every investment advisor you ever hired." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Dad's heavy breathing. He looked like a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed around him. And I still wasn't finished. "But there's more," I continued, pulling out my phone. "Mom also left me something else. Recordings of conversations she had with Dad over the years about money and financial decisions." Dad's eyes widened in horror. "What recordings?" "Mom started recording your financial discussions about 5 years ago," I explained to the room. "She wanted to document the pattern of how you dismissed her opinions and undermined her confidence about money." I opened the audio app on my phone and selected the first recording. "This is from 3 years ago, when Mom suggested we should diversify our investment portfolio to include more international stocks." Dad's voice filled the room, condescending and dismissive. "Helen, sweetheart, you don't understand how international markets work. These are complicated financial instruments that require expertise you simply don't have. Let me handle the investment decisions. That's what I'm good at." Then came Mom's voice, quiet and deferential. "I just thought it might be wise to have some exposure to emerging markets. I've been reading about—" Dad's voice cut her off. "Reading about investments in magazines doesn't make you qualified to make financial decisions. I have professional advisors who handle these matters. You focus on managing the household budget. That's more your speed." The recording ended, and the room was silent. People were staring at Dad with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. They had just heard him dismiss his wife's financial intelligence in the most condescending way possible. "That international diversification Mom suggested," I said to the room. "She implemented it in her private portfolio. It generated a 23% return that year, while Dad's advisors managed only 11%. I played another recording, this one from 2 years ago when Mom had suggested they should reduce their exposure to a particular tech stock that she thought was overvalued. Again, Dad's voice was dismissive and patronizing. "Helen, you're worrying about things you don't understand. This company has excellent fundamentals. My advisors have done extensive research on this investment. Trust me to handle these decisions. Mom sold that stock in her private portfolio 2 weeks before it crashed, I announced. She avoided a $47,000 loss that Dad's portfolio absorbed because he wouldn't listen to her advice. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone in the room. For years, Dad had been dismissing Mom's financial insights while she was secretly implementing those same strategies in her own portfolio with spectacular success. But the most damaging recording was yet to come. This last recording is from 8 months ago, I said, when Mom was already sick but still trying to contribute to family financial discussions. The audio began with Mom's weak voice suggesting they should move some money into healthcare stocks, given the aging population and increasing medical costs. Dad's response was cruel. "Helen, you're not thinking clearly because of the medication. These are complex investment decisions that require a sharp mind. You should focus on getting better and leave the financial planning to me." The room was completely silent as people absorbed the cruelty of Dad dismissing his sick wife's intelligence and attributing her ideas to medication-induced confusion. "Mom bought healthcare stocks in her portfolio that month," I said quietly. "They've gained 34% since then." I put my phone away and looked around the room at the faces of people who had known my parents for decades. They were seeing Dad clearly for the first time. Not as the successful attorney who had lovingly guided his less capable wife, but as a controlling man who had systematically undermined a brilliant woman's confidence for 30 years. "So when Dad announced that everything Mom owned belongs to him now," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "he was making an assumption based on 30 years of financial control and manipulation. But Mom was smarter than he ever gave her credit for." I pulled out the final document, a letter Mom had written to be read at this moment. "Mom left this letter to be shared with everyone today," I announced. "She wanted you all to understand why she made the decisions she did." I began reading in Mom's own words. "To my family and friends gathered at my funeral, if Catherine is reading this letter, it means I have passed away. And Richard has just announced his expectation of inheriting my assets. I want you all to know that the woman Richard always described as not a business person actually built a $3.2 million investment portfolio through careful planning, intelligent research, and disciplined saving. For 30 years, Richard convinced me and everyone else that I wasn't smart enough to make financial decisions. He gave me an allowance like I was a child, dismissed my investment ideas, and made me feel grateful for his guidance on money matters. But I never stopped being the economist I was trained to be. I just learned to hide my intelligence to avoid his criticism and control. I am leaving my entire portfolio to Catherine because she has never let anyone convince her she was less capable than she actually is. I hope this inheritance will give her the financial independence I never had and serve as proof that women should never let others define their worth or capabilities. Richard, if you are hearing this, I want you to know that every financial decision you dismissed, every idea you rejected, every time you told me I didn't understand money, I was proving you wrong in my private portfolio. The woman you thought was helpless actually outperformed your expensive advisors year after year. I hope this revelation will teach you to respect women's intelligence and capabilities, but more than that, I hope it will show everyone that we should never underestimate people based on gender, age, or the roles others try to force us into. Catherine, use this money wisely and never let anyone make you feel small. You are brilliant, capable, and deserving of respect. Make sure the world knows it." The letter was signed Helen Mitchell, economist and investor. When I finished reading, the room remained silent for several long moments. Then, slowly, people began to react. Some were crying, moved by Mom's words and the revelation of her hidden strength. Others were staring at Dad with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Dad himself looked like a broken man. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and he seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. The confident, controlling persona he had maintained for decades had crumbled completely. "This is impossible, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Helen couldn't have. She didn't know how to. She knew exactly how to, I said firmly. She was brilliant, Dad. She was always brilliant. You just spent 30 years convincing her and everyone else that she wasn't. The crowd began to disperse, people leaving with shocked expressions and whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. Several of Mom's friends approached me to express their admiration for her intelligence and their disgust at how Dad had treated her. I always suspected Helen was smarter than Richard gave her credit for, said Mrs. Chen, an elderly family friend. But I had no idea she was building her own fortune. Good for her. As the last guest left, Dad and I were alone in the living room where he had just suffered the most humiliating experience of his life. "How long did you know?" he asked quietly. "About 6 months," I replied. "Mom told me everything when she set up the trust. She wanted me to understand what she had accomplished and why she was doing it." Dad sat down heavily in his chair, looking defeated. $3 million, he said to himself. She had $3 million and never told me. She had $3 million because she never told you, I corrected. If you had known about it, you would have taken control of it and dismissed her investment strategies, just like you dismissed everything else she tried to contribute. He looked up at me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. She was really that good at investing? She was better than your advisors, I said. She was better than most professional fund managers. She was brilliant, Dad. She was always brilliant. You just never let her show it. The full weight of what he had lost, not just financially, but in terms of the relationship he could have had with Mom, seemed to hit him all at once. But my work wasn't finished yet. There were still consequences to be delivered. Over the next few weeks, the story of Mom's secret portfolio spread through our community like wildfire. Dad's law partners, social circle, and professional contacts all learned about the brilliant woman he had spent decades underestimating and the spectacular way she had proven him wrong. The professional consequences were swift and severe. Several of Dad's clients, particularly his female clients, began questioning whether they wanted to work with an attorney who had so thoroughly misjudged and mistreated his own wife's capabilities. If Richard couldn't recognize his wife's financial genius after 30 years of marriage, one client told his partner, how can I trust his judgment about my legal matters? Dad's law firm, Morrison and Associates, began distancing themselves from the scandal. James Morrison called me personally to express his admiration for Mom's accomplishments and his disappointment in Dad's behavior. We had no idea Richard was so controlling at home, he told me. Helen always seemed quiet at firm events, but we assumed she was just shy. Now we understand she was being systematically silenced. The firm suggested that Dad take an extended leave of absence to deal with his personal matters. It was a polite way of removing him from client contact while they assessed the damage to their reputation. But the social consequences were even more devastating. Dad had built his identity around being the smart, successful man who guided his less capable wife through life's complexities. Now everyone knew that the opposite had been true. Mom had been the financial genius, while Dad had been too arrogant to recognize her abilities. The country club where Dad had been a member for 20 years asked him to resign after several female members complained about his presence making them uncomfortable. The charity boards where he had served as treasurer removed him from his positions, citing concerns about his judgment and treatment of women. We can't have someone representing our organization who spent 30 years financially controlling and emotionally manipulating his wife, explained Margaret Foster, the chairwoman of the Children's Hospital Foundation. It sends the wrong message about our values. Dad's social circle evaporated almost overnight. Couples who had been friends for decades stopped inviting him to dinner parties and social events. The men were embarrassed by association, and the women were disgusted by his treatment of Mom. I keep thinking about all the times Helen tried to contribute to conversations about investments or business, said Carol Peterson, a longtime family friend. Richard would always shut her down with that condescending smile. Now we know she was probably right about everything, but the most satisfying consequence was financial. Dad had been counting on Mom's inheritance to fund his retirement and maintain his expensive lifestyle. Without that $3.2 million, he was forced to confront the reality of his own financial situation. It turned out that Dad's wealth was largely illusion. His law practice generated substantial income, but he had been spending almost everything he earned on maintaining appearances: the expensive house, luxury cars, country club memberships, and lavish vacations. His actual savings were modest, and his investment portfolio had underperformed the market for years. "Your father is what we call income rich but asset poor," explained Patricia Chen when I met with her to discuss managing Mom's trust. "He makes a lot of money, but he doesn't save or invest it wisely. Without your mother's inheritance, he's going to have to make some major lifestyle adjustments." Those adjustments came quickly. Dad was forced to sell the family home and move into a modest condo. He traded his BMW for a used Honda. He canceled his country club membership and stopped taking expensive vacations. The man who had spent 30 years lecturing Mom about financial responsibility was learning what it meant to live within his actual means for the first time in decades. Meanwhile, I was discovering the full extent of Mom's financial genius. Working with Patricia, I reviewed every investment decision Mom had made over 25 years. Her portfolio was a masterpiece of diversification, risk management, and strategic thinking. "Your mother had an intuitive understanding of market psychology," Patricia explained as we reviewed her investment history. She could identify undervalued companies before the professional analysts caught on. She understood global economic trends and positioned her portfolio accordingly. Mom had invested in Apple when it was still considered a niche computer company. She had bought Amazon stock when most people thought it was just an online bookstore. She had diversified into international markets, emerging economies, and alternative investments years before they became mainstream strategies. "She was essentially running her own hedge fund," Patricia said with admiration. And she was doing it better than most professional fund managers. The portfolio Mom had built wasn't just valuable, it was a testament to her intelligence, discipline, and strategic thinking. Every investment told a story of careful research, patient timing, and brilliant analysis. But perhaps the most meaningful discovery was a folder of research notes Mom had kept over the years. Page after page of handwritten analysis, company evaluations, and market predictions. She had been conducting the kind of thorough financial research that professional analysts charge thousands of dollars for. She never stopped being an economist, I realized as I read through her notes. She just had to hide it from Dad. 3 months after the funeral, I received a call from Dad. His voice was different, smaller, less confident than I had ever heard it. "Catherine, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee," he said. "There are some things I need to say to you." We met at a small cafe near his new condo, a far cry from the expensive restaurants where he used to conduct business meetings. He looked older, more fragile, wearing clothes that seemed too big for his diminished frame. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, like he was trying to warm himself. "About your mother, about our marriage, about how I treated both of you." I waited, curious to see if he was capable of genuine self-reflection or if this was another manipulation attempt. "I was wrong," he said quietly, "about everything. Helen was brilliant, and I spent 30 years making her feel stupid. You're brilliant, and I tried to do the same thing to you." He paused, staring into his coffee. "I think I was threatened by intelligent women," he continued. "My mother was very smart, but my father always dismissed her opinions. I learned that pattern from him, and I repeated it with Helen." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I lost everything," he said simply. "My wife, my reputation, my financial security, my friends. And I'm starting to understand that I lost it all because I couldn't accept that the women in my life were smarter than I was." He looked up at me with eyes that seemed genuinely remorseful. "Helen's portfolio, I've been studying it with a financial advisor. Every investment she made, every strategy she used, it was all brilliant. She was a better investor than anyone I ever hired, and I never let her show it." "She tried to show it," I reminded him. "You shut her down every time." "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for several minutes, Then Dad asked the question I had been expecting. Is there any chance you might consider sharing some of the inheritance? I'm not asking for much, just enough to help me get back on my feet. I looked at this man who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small and incapable, who had systematically destroyed Mom's confidence while she was secretly building a fortune, who had announced his expectation of inheriting her money at her own funeral. No, I said simply. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. I don't deserve it. It's not about what you deserve, I explained. It's about what Mom wanted. She left that money to me because she wanted it to go to someone who would value what it represents: intelligence, independence, and the refusal to let others define your worth. I stood up to leave, then turned back to him. But Dad, there is something you can do. You can use this experience to become a better person. You can learn to respect women's intelligence and capabilities. You can stop trying to control and diminish the people around you. He nodded slowly. I'm trying to learn that. It's harder than you might think to change patterns you've had for 60 years. Mom changed, I pointed out. She spent 30 years letting you convince her she wasn't smart enough to make financial decisions. Then she secretly built a $3 million portfolio. People can change if they want to badly enough. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Dad's apology didn't undo 30 years of emotional manipulation, but it was a start. More importantly, it confirmed that Mom's plan had worked exactly as she intended. She had wanted Dad to face consequences for his controlling behavior, and he had. She had wanted to prove that she was brilliant despite his attempts to convince her otherwise, and she had. Most of all, she had wanted to ensure that I would never let anyone make me feel small or incapable, and her gift had given me the financial independence to guarantee that. 1 year after Mom's funeral, I stood in the conference room of my new financial planning firm, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The Helen Mitchell Financial Group occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown office building, and our client list was growing rapidly. Using Mom's inheritance as seed capital, I had left my corporate law job to start a financial planning firm specifically focused on helping women build and manage their own wealth. Our mission statement, displayed prominently in the lobby, read, "Empowering women to achieve financial independence through education, strategic planning, and respect for their intelligence." Patricia Chen had joined as my business partner, bringing her expertise and her existing client base. Together, we had created something Mom would have been proud of, a firm that treated women as capable financial decision makers rather than dependents who needed male guidance. We have 3 new client consultations this afternoon, Patricia told me as she entered the conference room with our morning coffee. All referrals from existing clients who are happy with their portfolio performance. Our success had been remarkable. In just 1 year, we had grown from a 2-person startup to a firm managing over $50 million in client assets. Our investment strategies, based largely on the principles Mom had developed in her secret portfolio, were consistently outperforming the market. But more than the financial success, I was proud of the impact we were having on our clients' lives. We worked primarily with women who had been dismissed or underestimated by traditional financial advisors. Divorced women taking control of their finances for the first time, widows learning to manage inherited wealth, and professional women who wanted investment strategies that reflected their values and goals. I never thought I was smart enough to understand investing, one client had told me during a recent review meeting. My ex-husband always handled the money, but you've shown me that I can make these decisions myself, and I'm actually good at it. That was exactly the kind of transformation Mom had envisioned when she planned her revenge against Dad's financial control. Speaking of Dad, our relationship had evolved into something cautiously cordial. He had indeed learned from his humiliation, though the process had been painful and slow. He was seeing a therapist to address his controlling behaviors and had joined a support group for men working to overcome toxic masculinity patterns. I'm learning that my need to be the smartest person in the room was really about my own insecurity, he had told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. I diminished your mother because I was afraid her intelligence would make me look inadequate. He had also made a surprising career change. After losing most of his law clients, Dad had taken a position as a legal aid attorney, helping low-income families with basic legal needs. The pay was a fraction of what he had earned in private practice, but he seemed to find meaning in work that helped people rather than just generating income. "It's humbling," he admitted. "Most of my clients are women who have been financially abused by their husbands or partners. Working with them has shown me how much damage controlling behavior can cause." The irony wasn't lost on either of us that Dad was now helping women escape the kind of financial control he had exercised over Mom for 30 years. But the most meaningful development was the scholarship fund I had established in Mom's name. The Helen Mitchell Memorial Scholarship provided financial support for women returning to school to study economics, finance, or business after taking time away from their careers. "Your mother would be so proud," Grandma Rose had told me at the Scholarship Fund's inaugural dinner. At 89, she was still sharp and had become one of my most enthusiastic supporters. She always said women needed to understand money to be truly independent. The first scholarship recipient was a 45-year-old woman named Maria Santos, who had given up her accounting career to raise her children and was now returning to school to get her MBA after her divorce. Her story reminded me so much of Mom's situation that I had personally mentored her through her first year back in school. "I feel like I'm reclaiming a part of myself I thought was lost forever," Maria had told me. "Your mother's story gives me hope that it's never too late to show the world what you're capable of." That was Mom's true legacy, not just the money she had left me, but the inspiration she provided to women who had been underestimated and dismissed. Her secret portfolio had become a symbol of hidden strength and intelligence, proof that women could excel in areas where they were told they didn't belong. The business was thriving, but I had also used Mom's inheritance to build the personal life I wanted. I had bought a beautiful house with a garden where I could grow the vegetables Mom had taught me to love. I had traveled to places she had always wanted to visit but never could, because Dad controlled their vacation destinations. Most importantly, I had learned to value my own intelligence and capabilities in ways that no one could undermine. Mom's gift hadn't just been financial, it had been the confidence to trust my own judgment and never let anyone make me feel small again. 6 months ago, I had started dating Michael Chen, Patricia's nephew, who was a professor of economics at the local university. What I loved most about Michael was that he celebrated my intelligence rather than feeling threatened by it. When I explained complex investment strategies or analyzed market trends, he listened with genuine interest and respect. "You have your mother's gift for seeing patterns that others miss," he had told me after I successfully predicted a market correction that saved our clients significant losses. "It's remarkable to watch you work." The contrast with Dad's lifelong pattern of dismissing women's intelligence couldn't have been more stark. Michael's respect for my capabilities felt like a gift in itself, the gift of being seen and valued for who I really was. As I stood in my office that morning, looking out at the city where Mom had once worked as a young economist before Dad convinced her to give up her career, I felt her presence strongly. She had spent 30 years hiding her brilliance to avoid Dad's criticism and control. Now her legacy was helping other women discover and celebrate their own financial intelligence. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "The Wall Street Journal wants to interview you about the firm's success. They're particularly interested in your mother's story and how it inspired your business model." I smiled, thinking about how proud Mom would be to know that her secret rebellion had become a public inspiration for other women. The woman Dad had dismissed as not a business person was about to be featured in the nation's premier business publication as an example of hidden female financial genius. That afternoon, as I prepared for the Wall Street Journal interview, I pulled out the letter Mom had left for me personally. Not the one that had been read at the funeral, but a private message she had written just for her daughter. "My dearest Catherine," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have passed away and you have inherited my portfolio. I hope you understand that this money represents more than just financial security. It represents the proof that women should never let others define their limitations." I spent 30 years letting your father convince me I wasn't smart enough to make important decisions. But I never stopped learning, growing, and proving him wrong in secret. Now I want you to prove him wrong in public. Use this inheritance to build the life you want, not the life others expect you to have. Show the world what you're capable of. Help other women discover their own strength and intelligence, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small. You are brilliant, capable, and deserving of respect. Make sure everyone knows it. All my love, Mom. P.S. The look on your father's face when you revealed the truth at my funeral will be worth every penny I saved. I wish I could have seen it myself. I laughed through my tears, imagining Mom's satisfaction at the perfect execution of her 30-year plan. She had turned a lifetime of financial oppression into the ultimate revenge, and she had used that revenge to create opportunities for other women to succeed. The Wall Street Journal interview went beautifully. The reporter was fascinated by Mom's story and the way her hidden portfolio had inspired a new model for women-focused financial planning. Your mother's secret investments have become something of a legend in financial circles, the reporter told me. Portfolio managers are studying her strategies, and business schools are using her story as a case study in long-term wealth building. She would be amazed to know that, I replied. She spent so many years thinking she wasn't smart enough to contribute to financial discussions. Now she's being studied by the experts who never would have listened to her when she was alive. The article, published 2 weeks later, was titled "The Secret Millionaire: How One Woman's Hidden Portfolio Inspired a Financial Revolution." It featured a photo of me in my office, with Mom's portrait prominently displayed on my desk. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reached out to share their own stories of financial dismissal and hidden strength. Several wanted to become clients, others wanted to start similar firms in their own cities, and many simply wanted to say thank you for showing them that their intelligence and capabilities mattered. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Dad called me the day the article was published, his voice thick with emotion. "I read the Wall Street Journal piece," he said. "I'm so proud of what you've built, and I'm so sorry it took your mother's passing for me to understand how brilliant she was." "She was always brilliant, Dad," I replied gently. "She just needed someone to believe in her intelligence instead of trying to suppress it." "I know that now," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm telling everyone who will listen about Helen's accomplishments. I'm trying to make up for 30 years of not giving her the credit she deserved." It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Dad was finally honoring Mom's intelligence publicly, even though it came too late for her to hear it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Mom's revenge had accomplished something even more profound than financial justice. It had forced everyone who knew our family to confront their own assumptions about women's capabilities and intelligence. It had started conversations about financial control and emotional manipulation that were long overdue. Most importantly, it had created a legacy that would help other women avoid the suppression Mom had endured for 30 years. That evening, I stood in my garden, tending to the vegetables Mom had taught me to grow, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. The tomatoes were thriving, just like the ones Mom had grown in her small backyard garden, the one place where Dad had never tried to control her decisions because he considered gardening women's work. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mom had found freedom in the very activities Dad had dismissed as unimportant. Her garden had been her sanctuary, just like her secret portfolio had been her rebellion. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maria Santos, the scholarship recipient I had been mentoring. "Catherine, I have incredible news," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I just got accepted to the PhD program in economics at Northwestern, the same school your mother attended, and they're offering me a full research assistantship." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Maria, that's wonderful. Mom would be so proud." "I never would have had the confidence to apply if not for your mother's story," Maria continued. "Knowing that she built a $3 million portfolio while everyone told her she wasn't smart enough to understand money, it gave me the courage to believe in my own abilities again." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, feeling Mom's presence more strongly than ever. Her legacy was rippling outward in ways she never could have imagined, inspiring women to reclaim their intelligence and financial independence. 2 years after the funeral, I received an invitation that would have made Mom laugh with delight. The American Association of Financial Planners wanted me to give the keynote address at their annual conference. The topic? Hidden Genius: Recognizing and Nurturing Underestimated Talent in Financial Services. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of hundreds of financial professionals, I began my speech with Mom's story. 2 years ago, my father announced at my mother's funeral that everything she owned belonged to him now, I said, watching the audience's shocked expressions. He had no idea that the woman he had spent 30 years dismissing as financially incompetent had secretly built a portfolio worth over $3 million. The speech was met with a standing ovation, but more importantly, it sparked a movement within the financial services industry to examine how women's contributions were being overlooked and undervalued. Several major firms reached out afterward to discuss implementing training programs to help their advisors better serve female clients. Business schools began incorporating Mom's story into their curricula as an example of how bias and assumptions can blind us to talent and intelligence. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was personal. 6 months after my keynote speech, I received a letter from a woman named Jennifer Walsh, no relation, despite the shared surname. "Dear Catherine," she wrote, "I heard your speech about your mother's secret portfolio, and it changed my life. For 15 years, my husband has been telling me I'm too emotional and impractical to handle our investments. After hearing your mother's story, I opened my own investment account with money I had been saving from my part-time job. In 6 months, my portfolio has outperformed his by 12%. I'm finally ready to trust my own financial judgment." Letters like Jennifer's arrived regularly, each one a testament to Mom's continuing impact on women who had been told they weren't smart enough to manage money. 3 years after the funeral, I married Michael in a small ceremony in my garden, surrounded by the vegetables Mom had taught me to grow and the friends who had supported me through my journey. Dad was there, looking genuinely happy for me and treating Michael with the respect he had never shown Mom's opinions or achievements. "Your mother would have loved this," Dad told me as we danced at the reception. "She always said you deserved someone who celebrated your intelligence instead of trying to diminish it." It was the most insightful thing he had ever said about relationships, and it gave me hope that he was truly learning from his mistakes. As Michael and I settled into married life, I continued to grow the business and expand Mom's legacy. We opened a second office, launched an online education platform for women investors, and established partnerships with women's organizations across the country. But the most meaningful project was the book I was writing about Mom's story. The Secret Portfolio, A Daughter's Discovery of Her Mother's Hidden Genius, would be published the following year, with all proceeds going to the scholarship fund. The book proposal had generated significant interest from publishers, not just because of the compelling personal story, but because of the broader implications for how society views women's intelligence and capabilities. "This isn't just a story about one woman's secret investments," my editor had told me. "It's about the hidden potential that gets overlooked when we make assumptions about people based on gender, age, or social roles." 4 years after the funeral, I stood once again in a room full of people, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than somber. We were hosting the annual Helen Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Dinner, and the ballroom was filled with successful women who had been inspired by Mom's story. The keynote speaker was Dr. Maria Santos, who had completed her PhD and was now a professor of behavioral economics, researching how gender bias affects financial decision-making. Her research was groundbreaking, and she credited Mom's story as her inspiration. Helen Mitchell proved that intelligence and capability can flourish even in the most suppressive circumstances, Maria told the audience. Her secret portfolio wasn't just a financial achievement. It was an act of resistance against a system that tried to convince her she wasn't smart enough to succeed. As I listened to Maria speak, I thought about how proud Mom would be to know that her quiet rebellion had become a catalyst for academic research and social change. The scholarship fund had grown to over $2 million, supporting dozens of women returning to school or starting their own businesses. Each recipient carried forward Mom's message that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle. But perhaps the most unexpected development was Dad's transformation. He had not only changed his own behavior, but had become an advocate for recognizing and addressing financial abuse in relationships. I spent 30 years committing financial abuse without even realizing it, he told a support group for men working to overcome controlling behaviors. I convinced my wife she wasn't capable of making financial decisions while she was secretly outperforming every professional advisor I hired. The damage I caused was devastating, and I'm committed to helping other men recognize these patterns before they destroy their relationships. Dad had also written a letter to be included in my book, taking full responsibility for his treatment of Mom and encouraging other men to examine their own assumptions about women's capabilities. Helen was brilliant, he wrote. She was always brilliant. I was too insecure and controlling to see it, and I robbed both of us of the partnership we could have had. I hope other men will learn from my mistakes and celebrate their partner's intelligence instead of trying to suppress it. 5 years after the funeral, I received a call that brought everything full circle. The executor of an estate in California had contacted me about a woman named Dorothy Chen, no relation to Patricia, who had passed away and left a note requesting that her secret investment portfolio be donated to the Helen Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. Mrs. Chen had been following your mother's story in the news, the executor explained. She had been hiding her own investment success from her controlling husband for 20 years. She wanted her portfolio to help other women achieve financial independence. Dorothy's portfolio was worth $1.8 million, bringing our scholarship fund to nearly $4 million. But more than the money, her story proved that Mom's legacy was inspiring women across the country to take control of their financial lives. The note Dorothy had left was heartbreaking and inspiring. I never had the courage to confront my husband the way Helen Mitchell confronted hers, but I want my secret investments to help other women find that courage. Thank you, Helen, for showing us that we're smarter than they tell us we are. As I read Dorothy's note, I realized that Mom's revenge had become something much larger than personal justice. It had become a movement, a symbol of women's hidden strength and intelligence, a reminder that we should never underestimate people based on others' limited perceptions of their capabilities. Today, 7 years after that dramatic moment at Mom's funeral, I run a financial planning firm that manages over $200 million in assets. We have offices in 5 cities, employ 37 people, and have helped thousands of women achieve financial independence. But the numbers, impressive as they are, don't capture the real impact of Mom's legacy. Every day, I receive messages from women who have been inspired by her story to trust their own intelligence, to challenge others' assumptions about their capabilities, and to build the financial independence that leads to true freedom. The Helen Mitchell Financial Group has become more than a business. It's a testament to the power of hidden genius and the importance of recognizing intelligence wherever it exists, regardless of gender, age, or social expectations. And Dad? He's now 67 years old, living modestly but contentedly in his small condo, working part-time at the legal aid clinic and volunteering with organizations that help women escape financial abuse. He's become an unlikely advocate for women's financial rights, speaking at conferences about the damage that financial control can cause in relationships. I lost the most brilliant woman I ever knew because I was too insecure to recognize her intelligence. He tells audiences, don't make the same mistake I did. Celebrate the smart women in your life. Don't try to diminish them. Last month, on the 7th anniversary of Mom's passing, I visited her grave with a copy of the Wall Street Journal article about our firm's latest expansion. As I placed the newspaper on her headstone, I whispered the words I wished I could have said to her while she was alive. You did it, Mom. You proved them all wrong, and you're still changing the world, one brilliant woman at a time. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could swear I heard her laughing, the sound of a woman who had spent 30 years hiding her genius and then found the perfect way to reveal it to the world. Mom's secret portfolio had been worth $3.2 million, but her true legacy was priceless. The knowledge that intelligence and capability can flourish even in the most suppressive circumstances, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply proving that you were brilliant all along. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their intelligence and capabilities matter, regardless of what others have told them. Drop a comment about your own experiences with being underestimated, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of dismissal and control. Remember, you are smarter and more capable than anyone who tries to make you feel small. Trust your intelligence and never let others define your worth.